Hey friends, I'm Jesse from ShrinkRC.com. This video is going to be about some of the tools that I commonly use on all of my RC builds and a couple of little tricks thrown in. Let's jump right into it. One of the things I like to use is a straight edge ruler. I like to have a small one and a big one, and these are great for a lot of things. Of course, you can measure with them. You can hold them down on a thing and mark with a pen against it to draw a straight line, and you can even put a razor up against it to cut a straight line, but these are just really handy to have around. Uh, Calipers are another thing that you're going to want to have. These are some really fancy expensive ones that I have. I use these in my real life job, but I also use them for Shrink RC quite a bit, and these can be really nice for marking. If you have a piece of plastic and you want it that's got a curve to it or a shape to it, and you want to make a line on it and a mark as a reference, you can actually set these to a specific dimension that you measure. You can tighten it, and then you can take and drag these along the surface like this. Oops, making sure that edge doesn't slip off, and you hold it along that edge. I don't know if that mark's showing up for you, but that's just one example right there. You can do that on the actual edge of a body to make a mark, and then that'll give you a guideline for where to put down some tape, for example. And of course, these are used for measuring depths and widths of things. If you haven't used one of these before, one of the tricks to these is if you're measuring how wide something is, you use, let's see, I'll try to turn this around so you can see this side. You go like this to measure how long or wide something is. And if you've got a depth of something that you're trying to measure down into, or a height of something, you can actually use it like this and stick this end down into what you're measuring and get a depth on it. So that's one thing that some people don't know about using these. And in fact, the other part of these is this spot here where you can measure between distances, and you can use those two blades to get in between an object and measure how wide it is between something. So you go between here, you go outside here, and you go with the depth here. And like I mentioned, there's a little nut on here for locking this, and then you can use it to mark things. I've had people scream at me that why am I using a $400 set of calipers to mark a plastic surface, but I've had these for years, and if you're using it on plastic like that, it doesn't really damage it, and these have been fine. Cutting tools. I grabbed a few of the most common cutting tools that I use, and something that may or may not be obvious is that you want to have a good X-Acto knife. Don't get the cheapest handle that they make. Get a little bit more expensive handle. It'll hold your blade better, and you'll have a better experience with it. And that's one of the common tools that I use. Also, you may want to get yourself a sort of a box cutter type knife. I like this Milwaukee one, and I keep a few of these around. And this is for a little bit more burly things that you want to cut. Then another thing that some people don't know about is flush cutters. These are great for getting parts off of sprues. You know, when you take off a sprue, it leaves that little bit of plastic on there that is rough. Well, if you have a set of flush cutters and you cut off the parts from your sprue with these, it makes a really, really clean edge. You can also clean up edges on things with these. If you have some extra flash on a part that you want to get rid of, you can use these. And the main thing with these is don't be like me. Don't use these on your big truck project or on some other project where you're cutting some kind of hard piece of steel, because you will damage the blades and you will have to wind up buying a new set, which is exactly what I need to do because I ruined these using them on my big truck. And it's not the first time I've done that. Files. These are some Tamiya needle files. These are also Tamiya files. This is kind of the cheapest starter set that they make, and it's got a flat and a round and a curved, and they call these needle files. Then if you want to do a little bit more, slightly bigger piece, and you want to cut through material a little faster and a little bit better handle, Tamiya also makes kind of upgraded ones. And so like one of these kind of costs the same as this whole set. But I actually have different times when I use different ones. Sometimes I need to get into a really small spot and these won't fit. I use these real small ones. Other times when I want to file in luxury, I use these larger ones. Let's see, is there a... This says it's a Tamiya hard-coated file, Pro. So these are the Pro files. So you can get by with just these. You don't need the Pros, but these are, like I said, it's kind of more luxurious to use these. Then, of course, the step up from a file is a Dremel. This is called a drum sander. And the two most common tips I use on my Dremel when it comes to RC is the drum sander and a carbide blade. So this is obviously for making sort of straight cuts, and this drum sander is where in places you would use a file, but it's a lot faster. The key to the drum sander too is that, like when I do fender openings on something like this, I don't actually cut that with a cutting blade. I use the drum sander. I hold this up kind of near my body and then I can take this drum sander and cut the opening on it back and forth. The thing about these is when you set the speed, if you have your speed too low, this is going to bounce around, and you'll know that when you go to put it on your part. It'll kind of bounce when you go to apply that drum sander. That means you've got your speed set too low. The other thing that can happen is if you set the speed on this too high, it'll start melting and burning your plastic. You'll smell it burning, you'll see it melting, and it'll fling sort of molten pieces of plastic off. You don't really want that either. So the sweet spot is going to be somewhere in the middle, kind of the lower to middle area, and you'll know where it is. If it's too slow, it'll bounce. If it's too fast, it'll get real hot. Now these drum sanders, they wear out. So the key to those is I go on Amazon and buy a little set of drum sanders, and these have 3 different sizes. It includes the little what are they, the tool that holds the sander in there. I don't know what they call that, but it's got all the different sizes in it. It's not very expensive for this set, and you just kind of have an unlimited supply. I use these on a lot of things, not just my RCs, but I use them on my big truck too. Last thing on the topic of sanding, when it comes to bodies, if you're not going to do any modifications to your body, before you paint it, you should hit it with some sandpaper. Something in the 600 grit range. You can even go finer, like 800 or 1000 grit when you're going to be painting a body, but you shouldn't just paint it right out of the box if you want that paint to stick. I don't actually always use primer, and the idea of primer is to create a surface for your paint to stick to, and then it's less likely to scrape off. But I found that if you're driving the trucks hard enough, you're going to scrape the paint no matter what. So I don't always bother with primer, but I do always pre-sand the bodies so that it gives it a little bit of a texture to the surface and gives your paint something to stick to. Now, I mentioned if you're not going to do any modifications to the body, you can use somewhere between 600 and 1000 grit. If you are making modifications to the body, you might want to start off, after you're done filing or dremeling, you might want to start off with a 100 or 200 grit sandpaper, then go to a 400 grit in that area that you've cut, and then use 600 as your final grit level. In other words, you're stepping up the refinement of the sandpaper. If you try to do a rough surface with this 600, you're going to be sanding it forever. But if you only use 200 grit, you're going to have kind of a rough surface, and paint's not going to hide it. Paint won't really be hidden. The paint won't really hide the sanding marks till you get up to these more fine levels like 600. After you've sanded the butt, by the way, this is a waterproof sandpaper. I do use it with water. I keep a little cup of water with me, or a little bowl of water, and I dip the sandpaper in the water, and that keeps the sandpaper from gunking up, keeps it from creating a bunch of dust in the air that you're breathing. Your sandpaper will last longer, and it won't get built up on the sandpaper and built up on the surface that you're sanding. So I use wet dry paper. I do use it wet, and I do this no matter what. After you're done sanding, use Dawn dish soap. Dawn, it's not just for dishes, but this Dawn dish soap, I actually have worked in machine shops and other areas of the automotive industry my whole life, and Dawn, specifically Dawn, is really great for cutting grease and dirt off of parts and not leaving behind any kind of residue. So whenever I'm done sanding a vehicle and I'm getting ready to paint it, I always wash it with some warm water and some Dawn, and I dry it off. I don't like to use paper towels because paper towels will leave behind little bits of paper towel, and then you've got to deal with that. So I always shake the part dry, and then I dry it off with a microfiber towel. You can also just use a regular towel that's been washed. And I say as opposed to a brand new towel, it's better to use one that's been washed because the fibers are less likely to come off. That's even true for microfiber, but I usually just use the microfibers right out of the bag. When you're getting ready to paint, sometimes you want to mask off an area. Now, all you need really is some blue masking tape to mask off paint areas. But if you have some detail, like some stripes or some small areas that you want to do, Tamiya actually makes little sort of pinstripe widths of masking tape, and they have these in like 1 millimeter and 2 millimeter and 3 millimeter, etc., up to 1/4 inch and more, 6 millimeter. And I like to go to the edges of my part with this because this is real flexible tape. So you can, like I say, it's almost like pinstriping tape, and you can go real flexible, use small pieces of it to trim out what it is you're trying to mask. And then once you've put down your edge, then you can do the big areas with some big blue tape. You can use blue tape, green tape, doesn't matter. But the key is that you want it to have a little bit of flexibility to it. Jumping from tape to paint. Hard bodies don't use what's called RC paint. RC paint is for Lexan bodies, and RC paint is flexible, and you paint the Lexan body from the inside. But when it comes to hard bodies are painted on the outside, and they're typically ABS plastic. Tamiya bodies are actually styrene, but all the RC four-wheel drive bodies are ABS plastic. And after they've been sanded and washed, you can paint them with Rust-Oleum, Valspar, any kind of regular old, what I call regular old spray paint, enamel, lacquer spray paint. I actually have had good luck with the Duplicolor engine paint. And the thing about Rust-Oleum and some of those others, like Rust-Oleum and Krylon, you have to be careful with those because those come out of the can really thick, and it's a big high volume of paint that comes out of those cans. And if you're not careful, it's pretty easy to get too much paint on your part and wind up with runs and drips and paint that takes a long time to dry. So if you're worried about your painting skills, and I'm always worried about my painting skills because I'm really not that great of a painter, the paint that gives me the best results is Tamiya. And this is a Tamiya TS paint, and this comes out in a very fine mist. And even if you put on a little bit too much of it, in my experience, if you just leave it alone and let it sit for a while, it will kind of even out and spread itself out. The catch is that a can of this costs almost the same as a can of this. And so, on one body, you go through about 150 cans of this, so it winds up being a very expensive paint job with this paint. These cans are like $7 or $8. And obviously, so are these cans, and you can see the difference in the amount you get. But if it's a project you really, really care about and you really want it to come out nice, or you're really worried about your ability to do it well, then it might be worth it to spend the extra money on the Tamiya paints. And so these are Tamiya TS paints. And I say that because you want to avoid getting what's called RC paint. And I think the RC paints are PS, and the PS would probably be for polycarbonate. But that's enough on spray paints. Easiest is going to be Tamiya paint. Least expensive is going to be some of the cans, but Duplicolor, kind of one of the better ones. Last little thing on paint. For touch-ups or for doing little details on your dash or little parts of your interior, these little paint pens from Decocolor, and there's a couple of brands that make them, are real fine tip, and you can get into a little tight spot and it doesn't make a mess. You don't have to do any masking beforehand. And I use these for little things all the time. These even come in handy sometimes for other projects. This one's a chrome one. So you got chrome, black. If you have chrome, black, silver, and white, that'll cover, for me, that covers most of the things I need to do. Every once in a while I'll buy another color, but these are great for touch-ups and doing little details on things like dashes. Let's kind of skip tracks to holes, drilling holes in bodies and making holes or threads in bodies. If you're going to make a hole in a body, a lot of times you go to use your drill bit, and the drill bit wants to kind of drift on you when you start drilling. You guys have all experienced that. You go to make your hole and the bit kind of goes like this. Well, That's why you want to use a center punch before you make your holes. Take your center punch, and on plastic you usually don't even need a hammer. You can kind of just hold it and give it a good press, and it'll make a little indent in the plastic. That's going to help center your drill bit and keep it from drifting when you go to make that hole. Most common is kind of drill bits you're familiar with are like this. I wanted to make a little side note. This is a 1/8 inch drill bit, and for any RC four-wheel drive body, whenever I get it, first thing I do, and it doesn't matter if it's a body that you're going to use shrink RC mounts on or not, or if you're just using the stock mounts. These bodies, the holes for the screws that are right here and here, a lot of times they come out of the injection mold tool and the hole is a little bit undersized, and it makes your screw catch on that hole. When you go to screw in the body to the body mount, the body catches on it and the body will ride on that screw, and it prevents your screw from getting into the hole well, and it might even prevent your body from seating correctly against the mounts. I've had a customer or two right in the past say, hey, there's something wrong with the mounts because my body isn't sitting against the sitting flat against the mounts. And I asked them, did you go through and drill out the holes in the body to make sure it's not catching the screw? Next thing you know, they go and they take an 1/8 inch drill bit, they drill through those two holes where the body goes to the mount. It cleans up that hole, gives that screw just a little bit of wiggle room because those screws are 3 millimeter. 1/8 inch is just a little bit more than 3 millimeters, so it works out to be the perfect size. I do this on all the bodies. I especially do it on cruisers and the Land Rovers. If you have the Land Rover or the Land Cruiser, the D90 or the Cruiser, and you're using shrink body mounts, I actually size up the screws from what it comes with from the factory. These come with 2.5 millimeter, 2.6 millimeter screws. So if you're using shrink RC body mounts on these, you actually have to go through with an 1/8 inch drill bit and open up those two holes, and then you can use M3 screws on there. Another thing that a lot of people aren't familiar with is a pin vise. That's what this portion of this is called, and they sell little tiny drill bits for pin vises. I don't know if that'll come up on the camera, if it's going to be all blurry, but these come with a little kit. There's a whole bunch of little drill bits in it, and they're very fine size, and they're great for really small details, and you know the kind of things that you would use that on. But some people just aren't familiar with these, and in plastic you don't need a full-on power drill. You can just grab one of these and you turn it like this, and you can drill that hole by hand. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention taps. This is an M3 tap, and sometimes if you want to be able to screw a part to another part and you don't have a way to attach it well, you can grab an M3 tap, get a drill bit that's just a little bit smaller than this, pre-drill a hole, then put the tap in your drill, and you can drill through and create a threaded tap. You can use that on a piece of aluminum or steel. Usually plastic won't need it. Usually on plastic you can just kind of screw that screw right into the plastic, and the screw will create the threads for you. But taps. Allen tools. I wanted to talk about these for a minute because there are some really great brands of these out there, like MIP, and I know Vanquish sells a version of them, and there's different companies out there that sell very expensive, nice quality ones of these. But I bring these up because you don't have to spend a lot of money on these. I got these on this set on Amazon, and they're tie coated, and I use the heck out of these. And they're something like 12 or 15 bucks. And unless you're psychotic, you probably have not used these more than I have. Every time I build one of these bodies and make mounts for one of these bodies, I wind up having to take that body apart on and off, and the chassis apart, and put back together, changing the length of the chassis. And I really use the heck out of these. I've never worn one out. I actually have 3 sets. I keep one on my bench in here. I keep another set of these in the garage, and I keep another set in my backpack when I'm on the trail. But I just bring these up because if you are on a budget, don't feel like you have to go out and buy the really expensive Allen tools. You can buy these ones. These were from Amazon, and you'll see them. They sell them under a few different brand names, but they all look like this. They're actually really great, and I can't complain. One of the tricks for these is assembling links. I know that there's special tools out there for assembling links, but one of the things you can do is with your rod ends, with the balls installed, you can start this on your link, start the other end on your link, and then you can actually fish this through the link like this, fish this through this end of the link like this. I don't have my glasses on. And then you can grab these two sides and you can just turn it like this, and that until you get it down, tightened down to the point that you want it. And what I wanted to show you about these, it's kind of a cool little trick. If you're worried about making your links the exact same length, what you can do is, once you've assembled them, you can put two like this together. And if those are parallel, see how those are just parallel? There's a little bit of wobble, but basically these are parallel. Well, if you put these on and they're doing this, well, then you know that that link is a little bit longer than the one under it. And if they're doing this, you know this link's a little bit shorter than the one under it. So by stacking them both, you can hold them together like this, and if they're parallel, you've got two links that are the exact same length. On that same topic, one of the parts that I held out buying for the longest time because it didn't seem like it would be worth it is one of these little link ball end tools. And the way you use this is you set your ball end on your ball on the rod end. You insert that into the ball like this, and you can push the ball in. You can actually also use this for disassembling ball ends, and it pushes it out real easily. Look at, I just pushed that one out, and that's lost forever. But this tool comes in so handy. These are actually shock pliers technically, and I do use them as shock pliers as well. And when you have a shock that you're putting parts onto, you can hold the shock. There's little round surfaces in here, and it's almost like a little nutcracker, and you can hold your shaft of the shock like this while you screw the rod end onto it. And it's a way to hold that shaft without marking it up. Like if you use pliers or something like that, you're going to chew up that shock shaft and you're going to lose the seal on it when it goes through the seal. But definitely recommend one of these shock wrench tools. I think I'm saying it right. And like I said, it also works with the ball ends. This is a great tool that I should have bought a long time ago. We're on the topic of Allen wrenches. Last thing on those, if you want, you can get yourself a little drill, rather an electric screwdriver more correctly. And this is a 4-volt electric screwdriver. I get asked about this one. I got it on Amazon a long time ago. It's a Bresson. They're not always available on there. But the reason I like these little 4-volt ones is if you use a big old drill size electric screwdriver with 8 volts or more, it's really easy to over torque when you put in your screws and strip a hole. With this, it's almost more like using a hand screwdriver. You can drill in and you'll actually feel the resistance on it like a screwdriver, and you can even use it as a screwdriver at the end a little bit. But there's just a lot of control with a 4-volt with a small diameter to it, and so I highly recommend those. When it comes to putting wheels on trucks, we all know about the little cross-shaped keys that they use for the wheels. Now these start to hurt your fingers, and you can't get that great of a grip on them. And so what I do is I actually get this is the type of a hand tool screwdriver thingy with the socket on the end, and I get a socket that matches the size on here, and this allows me to get in and really give a good, nice and easy tightening. I know that one actually needed to be tightened just now, and that one's nice and tight. But this is a lot handier than using these. And if you're like me, you're gonna wind up with a pile of these. And one of the things that's nice about having a pile of these is some of the rigs, like a portal axle Vanquish, for example, uses this special little socket, and then you put it on here, and you wind up with different tools. This is actually an RC 4-wheel drive tool that works with that blazer, and it's a special tool for the hub that goes on there. But I take my extra keys and I super glue in all these different special size tools. I haven't got around to it. I think this one was I can't remember if that was an SSD RC tool, but my plan is to take that one and super glue it down into that one, and then it keeps you from losing it, and it's just really handy, and you can just have several of these around with all the different ends on them. We're almost done here. Thread locker. Blue thread locker is lighter than red thread locker. If you're ever thinking about putting some thread locker on your truck because you've got a screw, thread locker is only for metal into metal. Never use thread locker on metal into plastic. But when you are using small screws like RC cars have, don't use red thread locker. Red thread locker is like meant to be nearly permanent. Not quite, but it winds up being permanent when you use it on really small screws. Blue thread locker has less of a tight bond to it. It's a softer bond on blue thread locker. So I use blue thread locker on some things where I'm worried about the screw falling out. For example, drive shafts where you have that pin that goes in the drive shaft. I always use blue thread locker on those. I'm not going to talk about glue in this video or adhesives because that's enough for a whole video by itself. And we're just going to leave glue and adhesive out of this particular video. Last thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was soldering. This is the actual soldering iron I use. I set the temperature at 650 degrees. I use rosin core solder, and that means it's got the flux built into the solder. And I'm not going to make a soldering video for you because I am the worst solderer I have ever met in my life. And I have no right to be teaching anybody how to solder. But there are plenty of good videos out there on it. And this is the tool that I use. It actually has helped me. I'm now doing better soldering than I used to. Let me put it that way. And the temperature I found that works for me and my solder is 650 degrees. And I say that because I've had a hard time figuring out that temperature that was ideal. When you are soldering, get you one of these little guys. I don't know what it's called. I'll have to look it up. But this is for holding your parts in place while you're soldering so you don't burn your fingers, or in my case, so you burn your fingers less. And I do like to use XT60 connectors. I buy them in a big bag like this. These are the connectors that for me are the easiest to solder. This bag has male and female, which is really handy because I always solder on the wrong one first and then I have to cut it off and solder on another one. So it's really handy for me to have a great big bag of both types on here. Anyway, that is my video on most of the parts and tools that I use and a couple little tricks for how I use them for my hard body RC builds. Thanks for watching, and be sure to go check out shrinkrc.com. Thank you.